To me, ignoring canning guidelines is like, well, playing Russian roulette. I think as canners, we feel a fellowship with each other. We know why we do what we do. A neighbor came by once while I was canning tomatoes, and he says, I don't understand why you spend hours in your hot kitchen canning tomatoes when you can just buy them off the grocery shelves. He didn't understand why I am growing these tomatoes organically, and I want to can them with no added ingredients. So my family has the best food I can offer them all winter long. I often call canning love in a jar. Some of us are self-taught. We watch videos. I have one on pressure canning and water bath canning. Or we read books that explain how to can. Or we might go to classes at our local extension office or our co-op. But many of us learned how to can from a family member or friend. And I think most of us try to keep current on canning safety guidelines, which, believe me, have changed substantially over the year because they found out new things. They have new lab equipment, new ways to test things. So canning safety guidelines change. And I strive to only use safe canning guidelines in my kitchen and recipes from trusted sites. But not everyone has adapted. They prefer to keep carrying on the family canning tradition exactly as it's always been done. And they ignore current safety rules. They complain, my kitchen, my rules. But what if this could endanger the health of your family? What if Granny was wrong? I often go to Healthy Canning's website, and she has a great page on historical canning publications, and it's a hoot if you want to read it. Because going through the different pamphlets, you can see how much canning guidelines has changed over the years. Now, her site has a warning. Do not assume the content of any of these historical canning guides reflects current scientific knowledge, policies, or practices. In fact, assume the opposite. Do not follow recipes or guidelines that are riddled with advice we now know is dangerous. And I have to say, I laughed out loud when I read this excerpt from a 1944 Canadian agricultural publication. Special method for canning raspberries and rhubarb. Raspberries and rhubarb may be canned successfully by what is known as the raw canning method. Pack fruit in sealers. Canadians at that time often called mason jars sealers. Cover with boiling syrup, adjust top, and completely seal. Place on several layers of newspaper in a tub and pour in enough boiling water to cover the sealers 3 inches over the top. In pouring in boiling water, care should be taken not to pour directly on the sealers. Place a blanket or rug over the tub and leave overnight or until cool. I bet not many people are still canning raspberries or rhubarb with this method. Yet, people pick and choose vintage canning methods because they say the old ways are best. But are they? Well, I am all for kitchen sovereignty, but I also know the old ways aren't always the best. I think we tend to romanticize and call the olden days simpler times. Well, let me tell you, it wasn't simple. My mom was born in 1907 in North Dakota on a homestead built out of scratch materials, and it really didn't have any insulation. Of course, there's no indoor plumbing. It was very, very rudimentary and very, very cold because in the winter, temps often drop below zero, and blizzards could happen even in May. Now, my mom couldn't wait to leave the farm, as she called it, and come into the city because city ways were easier. And she embraced things. I mean, she lived through 2 world wars, the Vietnam War, the Great Depression, you name it. But she embraced new technology. I remember when I was in grade school and there was going to be the moon landing, right? You were going to see somebody walk on the moon. She and Dad went out and bought a brand new console TV. And yes, we had the first color TV on the block, and all the neighbors came in to watch that historic site. And believe it or not, she had a microwave way before I did. She adapted and enjoyed what American ingenuity provided. And I like to think I am like her. I have evolved as canning procedures have evolved. I know my mother-in-law used to can jams and jellies with paraffin wax to seal them, but the wax can expand and contract wherever you're keeping your jars because temperatures might change. And so it might leave an area perfect for mold or yeast to grow. So I no longer use paraffin wax to seal my jars. And to be honest, do I really want paraffin wax, which is a petroleum product, touching my jams and jellies? I don't think so. So I don't use this old method. I used to water bath canned tomatoes just the way my mother did without adding extra lemon juice. But now I understand the science behind why we are supposed to. So I do add that lemon juice to each jar. Because even if I'm growing heirloom tomatoes, the soil might not be the same as it was 50, 75 years ago. And the acid level on those tomatoes might not be adequate. And that's especially true if you got hybrid tomatoes. They might be inherently lower in acid. So for safety's sake, I add that little bit of lemon juice to each jar when I'm canning tomatoes. I've changed with the times and the scientific information. Now, what blows my mind is when I see YouTube videos and TikTok videos of people water bath canning low acid vegetables and meat. And, the USDA guidelines say, no, only pressure can low acid foods, of which meat is one. Yet, some canners ignore the USDA safety guidelines, and their rationale given is simple. No one in their family has ever gotten sick by using these tried and true methods. So why deviate? Well, that argument doesn't really hold up. It has an inherent fallacy. It's known as the fallacy of induction or the fallacy of ignorance. And what that is, just because something never happened in the past doesn't mean something couldn't happen in the future. They're overlooking the possibility of new consequences or changes that could affect an outcome. And just because no one in their family got sick, well, other families haven't been as lucky. 7 cases of botulism was investigated in 1917 and 1918. In 2 of those cases, vegetables were canned by the cold pack method. One of the cooks stated positively that she had kept the filled jars in a covered boiler with the water actively boiling for 3 hours. Yet, the botulism toxin was still present. Now, let's look at this old newspaper article with the title, 12 Dined with Death. Love the title. It reminds me of like a cozy mystery book. 12 people died from botulism poisoning from peas that were water bath canned and used in a salad at a party at the Hine residence. Mrs. Hine, who was the canner, and 4 of her immediate family and 7 guests all died from the poisoning. Such a tragedy for such a small town. And you might say, but yeah, that was almost 100 years ago. Well, it's still happening. In 2015, a large botulism outbreak happened at a church potluck dinner in Ohio, where 29 people who ate potato salad prepared with water bath canned potatoes developed botulism and 1 died. And in 2018, 3 women in New York City contracted botulism for water bath home canned peas, which had been put in potato salad. And you'll see that some YouTube channels and TikTok channels recommend canning just the way the Amish do, and by water bath canning meat. Well, there's an inherent fallacy in that too, because not all Amish use water bath canning for meat. Many can meat in pressure canners nowadays. But believe it or not, as early as 1917, the U.S. Department of Agriculture determined that pressure canning was the only safe way to can meat. And on Healthy Canning's website, I found this 1945 U.S. Department of Agriculture booklet explaining in the simplest way possible why water bath and oven canning is unsafe for low-acid food. Simply because none of these methods heat the meat hot enough to kill bacteria in a reasonable time. There you have it in a nutshell. Why use a pressure canner instead of water bath canning meat or any low-acid food? To explain further, Clostridium botulinum can be found in the soil that vegetables are grown in, where meat animals graze, and it is on the surface of most fresh food. And you can wash the vegetables a bit, but that will only slightly remove it. But the botulism toxin is destroyed in boiling water, 212 degrees Fahrenheit, for a certain specified period of time. And that time varies depending on what you're canning. But the botulism toxin might have released spores, and the spores are not killed in that boiling water bath because they survive in a low oxygen, moist, and low acid environment. The only way to kill those is with high heat, heat between 240 and 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And you do that by pressure canning from anywhere from 20 to 100 minutes. Thus, really only pressure canning is safe for low acid vegetables and meat. It's simple. Now, maybe if you find that magical time to boil your meat long enough, 11 plus hours, and what nutrition have you lost during that period? And then after you open a jar, you boil it again for 10 to 20 minutes. Then maybe, just maybe, you don't have to worry about botulism. But do you know that to be true? Why take the chance? And I see another rationale for not following USDA guidelines, because they say, well, those guidelines aren't in Europe, and people in Europe are just fine. Well, are they? In 2021, there were 30 cases of botulism with home canned meats and 5 cases resulting in 1 death from home canned tomatoes. So why take a chance? Maybe you've always been lucky by using those old methods, but how do you know your luck will continue? Just has to happen once to make your family seriously ill. And why water bath can when you can pressure can? I talk about canners evolving, but unfortunately so has bacteria since our grandmother's time. And we can worry about more than just botulism. Scientists have discovered new food bacteria that wasn't even known a generation ago. And why do these happen? Well, it appears that bacteria has mutated because of maybe groundwater contamination, chemical sprays, etc. And unfortunately now it's even more resilient than before. And it can exist invisible in a canning jar until you pop open that lid and prepare it for your family. That is, unless you follow safe canning guidelines. Now, many of the people who don't follow the USDA safety guidelines are what they call rebel canners. And a lot of them are preppers, and they have an inherent distrust of the government or authority. Others may be homesteaders who are wary of current USA industrial food standards. And I believe many are just not aware of what can happen if you don't follow the guidelines. Now, I'm a prepper too, hence my channel name, right? Prepper Potpourri. And I'm often skeptical of government authority. Heck, I'm just a skeptic, period. However, it is precisely because I am a prepper that I follow USDA safety guidelines for canning. Because what's my ultimate aim for being a prepper? Keeping my family safe. I attempt to minimize any risks I might be able to foresee. And definitely having one of my family members eat my canned food and get botulism would be a risk. I mean, what ifs are what keep me up at night, right? Botulism is a fatal disease, and even when treated can cause long-lasting neurological problems, even paralysis. So why take that chance? But I urge you, do your own research. Two excellent sources are the USDA National Center for Home Food Preservation and your local extension office. Be wary of sites that promote unsafe canning methods. I believe often channels have a social media strategy. They want to get the most views possible to get the most money possible. And one of the ways to do that is to be a little bit on the fringe. So they make videos about waterbath canning meat and low-acid vegetables without any regard to the safety of the families who watch. Sure, they say this isn't endorsed by the USDA, but they are an influencer and they have to be careful about how they influence the people who watch their videos. Bottom line is, I continue to evolve as a canner, and I hope you do too. I am not a PhD trained food scientist, so I'm going to trust those that have the proper training and expertise. After all, this is my kitchen, my rules. And why would I take a chance, no matter how small the risk of harming my family? Hey, if you're a canner and having problems with siphoning, watch this video. And as always, happy canning.